a number of years ago, I was asked to be hospital chaplain. Now, this wasn't anything that I was expecting to do in ministry as a full-time ministry, but I gave it a college try. And I remember visiting this one young gentleman. He had 3 young children and a wife. And he had this illness that the doctors were not able to diagnose, and so they weren't able to properly treat him. Although they tried different things, I could see each and every time that I went to visit this gentleman that he was getting weaker and weaker. At the same time, I could see this gentleman pleading for healing from God. He did. I could clearly see, even though he was nonverbal at the time, I could see that he had faith and he wanted to be restored to good health. Now, after a few weeks, this gentleman passed away. Now, the first thing that we might say is, where were you, God? You know, why would God allow something like this to happen? Now, the first reading from the Book of Wisdom reminds us that our God is a God of life. And so even in those moments where we might question God, or we may wonder, why did God not respond? We have to hold firm that our God is a God of life. Why would God destroy something that God has created out of love? It's kind of like if you make breakfast for your family, or you make breakfast for a bunch of friends, you know, when it's safe to do so. And it's a beautiful breakfast. You have poured a lot of love into this breakfast. And then before you're about to serve it, you just throw it in the garbage. Now, that wouldn't make sense. And so God doesn't do the same with us. And we recognize that both death and also sickness are the result of sin. Think about the number of people who have been, or who have experienced sickness because of greed. And not only do the victims of greed suffer sickness and possibly death, but also those who perpetrate greed also face sickness and even possible death. And so in the second reading, the letter to the Corinthians, we are reminded to be generous. And so what Paul is really doing in this letter is he's encouraging the church in Corinth to be generous with the poor in Jerusalem. Corinth was a very happening place, and so the people had enough to survive with, and so they were encouraged to be generous. And so we are also encouraged to be generous. You know, maybe the reason why there is so much sickness in our world and so much suffering is because the world is inviting us to be generous. In the gospel reading, we have 2 miracles, 2 amazing miracles. And the first thing I'd like to say is that, you know, Jesus is on a mission to heal Jairus' daughter, and he's interrupted, and he actually stops and speaks with a woman. You know, for me, I would be like, I'm a man on a mission. I got one thing on my mind. I'm going to go do something about this daughter, and I'm going to skip everything else. But Jesus takes the time to encounter this woman. And now both of these people have likely come to Jesus as a last resort. Now, Jairus would have recognized that Jesus was creating a little bit of tension among the Jewish leaders, and so he wouldn't have exactly trusted in Jesus. But he eventually comes to the point that he has to plead with Jesus. And Jesus responds by coming with him. And on the way, he meets this woman who had been bleeding for 12 years. Now, part of her sickness would have actually been her isolation. She wouldn't have been able to participate in everyday life of the community because she would have caused other people to be unclean by her bleeding. And yet she sneaks into the crowd. She takes a risk to have an encounter with Jesus. And so we also are invited to take risks to encounter Jesus. Now, Jesus raises Jairus' daughter to new life. He shows that not only does he have authority over sickness, but he has authority over death. And so we can have comfort in that, because we don't know what lies ahead for our lives. And sometimes it's even hard for us to imagine that one day we will die. But we can be reassured, we can be encouraged that Jesus will raise us to new life. We will celebrate and be blessed with everlasting life. And so as we gather around the table, Lord, once again, the great brother of ours comes to us to to encourage us to be instruments of healing towards others and to place our trust that our God is a God of life.